The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Fallujah as Marine Sergeant Sarah Martinez adjusted her gear for what would become the longest day of her life. At 24, she had already served 2 tours in Iraq, but nothing had prepared her for the mission that lay ahead. Her squad was tasked with escorting a medical convoy through one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in the city, where insurgent activity had been escalating for weeks. Sarah checked her weapon one final time as her team gathered around the armored vehicles. The convoy consisted of 3 Humvees carrying critical medical supplies to a field hospital that had been treating both American soldiers and Iraqi civilians caught in the crossfire. Her commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel James Wright, briefed the team on the route they would take through the narrow streets, where every corner could hide danger. The convoy began its journey through the maze of concrete barriers and abandoned buildings that had become the landscape of war-torn Fallujah. Sarah rode in the lead vehicle, scanning the rooftops and alleyways for any signs of trouble. The radio crackled with updates from other units operating in the area, painting a picture of a city on edge. As they approached the halfway point of their route, Sarah noticed something that made her stomach tighten with concern. The streets, which had been relatively quiet moments before, were now completely empty. No civilians, no children playing, no vendors at their stalls. In her experience, this kind of sudden silence meant only one thing: trouble was coming. She keyed her radio and alerted the other vehicles in the convoy. "This doesn't feel right," she transmitted to her team. "Keep your eyes open and be ready for anything." The driver of their vehicle, Corporal Mike Chen, nodded grimly as he navigated around a pile of debris that hadn't been there during their reconnaissance the day before. The attack came without warning. A massive explosion erupted from an improvised explosive device hidden beneath a pile of rubble, lifting the rear vehicle off the ground and filling the air with smoke and debris. Before Sarah could fully process what was happening, the sharp crack of automatic weapons, fire echoed from multiple directions as insurgents opened fire from concealed positions. Sarah's training kicked in immediately as she coordinated her team's response while bullets whizzed past their position. She could see muzzle flashes coming from windows and doorways on both sides of the street, indicating they had driven straight into a carefully planned ambush. The medical supplies they were protecting suddenly seemed less important than the lives of her fellow Marines, who were now fighting for their survival. The radio filled with urgent communications as Sarah's team attempted to establish defensive positions while calling for backup. She could hear the voices of her squad members reporting their status and requesting immediate support from any available units in the area. The sound of incoming mortar rounds added another layer of danger as the insurgents escalated their attack. Despite the chaos surrounding her, Sarah maintained her focus on keeping her team alive and completing their mission. She knew that the medical supplies in their convoy could mean the difference between life and death for wounded soldiers and civilians at the field hospital. The weight of that responsibility drove her to make decisions that would soon put her own life in grave danger. As the firefight intensified, Sarah realized they were vastly outnumbered and would need to fight their way out of the kill zone. She began formulating a plan that would require extraordinary courage and would ultimately lead to the moment that would test every ounce of her strength and determination to survive against impossible odds. The ambush had turned the quiet street into a battlefield within seconds. Sarah's convoy was trapped between buildings filled with hostile fighters who seemed to know exactly where to position themselves for maximum damage. The lead vehicle had taken several hits, and Sarah could see that Corporal Chen was struggling to keep them mobile while dodging incoming fire from multiple directions. Sarah made a split-second decision that would change everything. She spotted a group of insurgents attempting to flank their position from a building on the left side of the street. If they succeeded, her entire team would be caught in crossfire with no escape route. Without hesitation, she grabbed her rifle and a handful of grenades, then kicked open the door of her Humvee. "Cover me," she shouted to her team as she rolled out of the vehicle and took position behind a concrete barrier. The sound of bullets striking the ground around her filled the air, but Sarah focused on the task at hand. She had identified the building where the flanking maneuver was originating, and she knew she had to neutralize that threat before it was too late. Moving from cover to cover, Sarah advanced toward the building while her team provided suppressing fire. She could hear Lieutenant Colonel Wright on the radio coordinating with other units, but she knew help was still minutes away. Those minutes felt like hours when every second brought new danger and the possibility that one of her fellow Marines might not make it home. As Sarah reached the entrance to the building, she could hear voices speaking in Arabic from the upper floors. She knew she was walking into a trap, but her team's survival depended on eliminating the threat from this position. She pulled the pin from a grenade and counted the seconds before tossing it up the stairwell, then pressed herself against the wall as the explosion shook the entire structure. The blast had done its job, but Sarah knew there were still hostiles in the building. She began clearing the rooms one by one, using the combat techniques she had drilled countless times during training. Each doorway could hide an enemy fighter, and each step forward required absolute focus and split-second decision-making that could mean the difference between life and death. On the second floor, Sarah encountered her first direct confrontation with an insurgent fighter. The man appeared suddenly from behind a doorway, raising his AK-47 toward her position. Sarah's reflexes saved her life as she dove to the side and returned fire, neutralizing the threat before he could get off a shot. The adrenaline pumping through her veins sharpened her senses and heightened her awareness of every sound and movement around her. She continued her advance through the building, knowing that every moment she spent inside increased the danger to her team outside. The radio chatter from her squad indicated they were holding their position, but taking heavy fire from multiple directions. Sarah pushed forward, driven by the knowledge that her actions could tip the balance of the firefight in their favor. As she reached the top floor of the building, Sarah could see the full scope of the ambush through a broken window. At least 20 insurgent fighters had positioned themselves in buildings throughout the area, creating an elaborate kill zone designed to trap and eliminate her convoy. The sight filled her with both anger and determination as she realized the level of planning that had gone into this attack. Sarah set up her position at the window and began engaging targets with precision fire, using her elevated position to support her team below. She could see the immediate impact of her efforts as the pressure on her convoy began to ease, but just as she started to feel they might have a chance of fighting their way out, she heard footsteps on the stairs behind her and realized she was about to face the fight of her life. The sound of multiple sets of boots on the stairs below sent ice through Sarah's veins. She had managed to clear most of the building, but now it seemed like reinforcements had arrived to trap her on the top floor. She quickly assessed her situation and realized she had limited ammunition left and no clear escape route. The window behind her offered only a 3-story drop to the concrete street below. Sarah positioned herself at the top of the stairwell and prepared for what would become the most intense firefight of her military career. As the first insurgent appeared around the corner, she engaged with controlled bursts of automatic fire. The narrow stairwell worked to her advantage, creating a bottleneck that prevented the attackers from using their numerical superiority effectively. The firefight in the stairwell was brutal and close quarters. Sarah used every piece of cover available, ducking behind concrete walls and using the architecture of the building to her advantage. Bullets flew in both directions as she fought to maintain her position, while conserving her dwindling ammunition supply. The sound of gunfire echoed through the building like thunder in a concrete canyon. During the intense exchange, Sarah felt the first bullet tear through her left shoulder, spinning her around and sending a shock of pain through her entire body. She gritted her teeth and continued fighting, knowing that showing any weakness would encourage her attackers to press their advantage. Blood began to seep through her uniform, but adrenaline kept her focused on the immediate threat. 2 more. Bullets found their mark as Sarah continued her desperate defense of the stairwell. One grazed her right leg while another struck her in the side just below her body armor. Each impact sent waves of pain through her body, but she forced herself to remain conscious and continue returning fire. She knew that if she lost consciousness, or lost control of the stairwell, both she and her team below would be doomed. The insurgents seemed to realize they were facing a determined and skilled opponent who would not give up easily. They began coordinating their attacks, with some fighters providing suppressing fire, while others attempted to advance up the stairs. Sarah found herself fighting multiple opponents simultaneously, requiring her to divide her attention and ammunition between different threats. As the firefight continued, Sarah began to hear the distant sound of helicopters approaching the area. She knew that backup was finally on the way, but she also realized she needed to survive long enough for help to arrive. Her radio had been damaged during the fighting, leaving her unable to communicate with her team or coordinate with the incoming support. The 7th and 8th bullets struck Sarah almost simultaneously, one hitting her in the right arm and another in her left leg. The impact sent her stumbling backward, but she managed to maintain her grip on her weapon and continue fighting. She could feel her strength beginning to fade as blood loss took its toll, but the sound of the approaching helicopters gave her the motivation to keep fighting. Sarah's vision began to blur slightly as the 9th and 10th bullets found their mark, striking her in the torso despite her body armor. She realized that her defensive position was becoming untenable, but she also knew that giving up the stairwell would allow the insurgents to set up positions that could devastate her team below. She made the decision to hold her ground regardless of the personal cost. The sound of the helicopters grew louder, and Sarah could hear the distinctive rotor noise of military aircraft circling the area. She knew that help was close, but she also realized that she was running out of time and ammunition. The insurgents seemed to sense this as well and began pressing their attack with renewed intensity. As bullets 11 and 12 tore through her body, Sarah felt herself beginning to weaken significantly. But somewhere in the distance, she could hear a new sound that filled her with hope. The rapid, controlled gunfire of American Special Forces engaging targets throughout the area. The SEALs had arrived and the tide of battle was about to turn. The arrival of the Navy SEALs changed the dynamic of the battle instantly. Sarah could hear the precise, coordinated gunfire of the Special Operations Team as they systematically engaged insurgent positions throughout the neighborhood. The sound of their weapons was different from the chaotic firing she had been hearing. Controlled, professional, and devastatingly effective. Despite the hope that filled her heart, Sarah's situation remained desperate. The 13th bullet caught her in the lower back as she attempted to change positions in the stairwell. The impact sent shockwaves of pain through her entire body, and she realized that her spine might have been damaged. Her legs began to feel weak and unresponsive, but she forced herself to continue fighting from her position on the floor. The insurgents in the stairwell seemed to sense that their window of opportunity was closing rapidly. The sound of SEAL team operations growing closer meant that their escape routes were being systematically cut off. This desperation made them more aggressive and reckless in their attacks, sending more bullets in Sarah's direction as they tried to finish her off before the special forces reached the building. Bullet 14 struck Sarah in her right shoulder, shattering her collarbone and making it nearly impossible to maintain a proper firing position. She was forced to switch to her sidearm, a decision that significantly reduced her effective range and firepower. Blood loss was making her dizzy, and she could feel her strength ebbing away with each passing moment. From her position at the top of the stairwell, Sarah could hear radio communications echoing through the building as the SEAL team coordinated their approach. The professional chatter filled her with relief, knowing that these elite warriors were methodically clearing the area and would soon reach her position. She just needed to hold on a little longer. The 15th and final bullet hit Sarah in her left side, puncturing her lung and making breathing extremely difficult. She collapsed against the wall, struggling to maintain consciousness as her body began to shut down from massive blood loss and trauma. Her vision tunneled, and the sounds around her began to fade as shock set in. Despite her critical condition, Sarah managed to maintain her grip on her sidearm and keep her eyes focused on the stairwell. She knew that if any insurgents made it past her position, they could potentially harm the SEAL team members who were coming to rescue her. Even in her weakened state, her sense of duty and loyalty to her fellow service members kept her alert and ready to fight. The sound of boots on the stairs returned, but this time Sarah heard something that made her heart race with relief. English voices speaking in the calm, professional tones of special operations personnel. "Friendly forces coming up," she heard someone call out using the standard announcement to prevent friendly fire incidents. Sarah tried to respond but found that her voice was barely a whisper. She managed to lower her weapon and raise one trembling hand to signal that she was an American soldier. The effort nearly caused her to lose consciousness, but she forced herself to stay awake as the first SEAL team member appeared at the top of the stairs. The Navy SEAL who reached her was a seasoned combat veteran named Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez. He immediately assessed Sarah's condition and began calling for medical evacuation, while his team members secured the rest of the building. His training in combat medicine kicked in as he began treating her most serious wounds and establishing an IV line to combat shock and blood loss. "Stay with me, Marine," Chief Rodriguez said firmly but kindly as he worked to stabilize Sarah's condition. You've done an incredible job here, but we need you to keep fighting just a little longer. The medics are on their way and we're going to get you out of here." Sarah tried to speak, to tell him about her team and the medical convoy that had been trapped in the ambush. Chief Rodriguez seemed to understand her concern and quickly briefed her on the situation. The SEAL team had successfully neutralized the insurgent positions, and her fellow Marines were safe and already being evacuated from the area. As the medical team arrived and began preparing Sarah for emergency transport, she finally allowed herself to close her eyes. She had taken 15 bullets and survived long enough for the SEALs to arrive and rescue not only her, but her entire team. The miracle of her survival was just beginning to unfold. The medical helicopter that airlifted Sarah from Fallujah to the combat support hospital was a blur of urgent activity and life-saving procedures. The flight medics worked frantically to stabilize her condition during the short but critical journey. Her blood pressure had dropped dangerously low, and she had lost consciousness multiple times during the initial treatment at the landing zone. Dr. Amanda Stevens, the trauma surgeon who received Sarah at the hospital, later described her condition as one of the most severe gunshot wound cases she had ever encountered. 15 bullet wounds had caused massive internal damage, including punctured organs, shattered bones, and significant blood loss. The medical team immediately rushed Sarah into emergency surgery, knowing that every minute was crucial for her survival. The first surgery lasted 8 hours as Dr. Stevens and her team worked to repair the most life-threatening injuries. They removed bullet fragments from her lungs, repaired damaged blood vessels, and stabilized her spine where one bullet had come dangerously close to severing her spinal cord. The complexity of her injuries required multiple specialists working together in a coordinated effort to save her life. During the surgery, Sarah's condition became critical several times. Her heart stopped twice on the operating table, requiring the medical team to perform emergency resuscitation procedures. Dr. Stevens later said that Sarah's physical fitness and mental toughness were the primary factors that allowed her to survive injuries that would have killed most people. When Sarah finally regained consciousness 3 days later, she found herself in the intensive care unit surrounded by machines monitoring her vital signs. Lieutenant Colonel Wright was sitting beside her bed, having flown to the hospital as soon as he received word of her condition. The relief on his face was evident as she opened her eyes and tried to speak. "Your team is safe," were the first words he spoke to her, knowing that this would be her primary concern. "Everyone made it out because of what you did in that building." The medical convoy reached its destination, and those supplies saved 12 lives that day. His voice carried a mixture of pride and emotion as he described how her actions had prevented a potential massacre. The road to recovery would be long and challenging for Sarah. She faced multiple additional surgeries to repair damage that couldn't be addressed during the initial life-saving operation. Physical therapy would be necessary to regain full use of her left arm and to overcome the weakness in her legs caused by the bullet that had grazed her spine. News of Sarah's survival spread quickly through the military community and eventually reached the media. Her story became a symbol of courage and determination in the face of overwhelming odds. Fellow service members from around the world sent messages of support and encouragement as she began her recovery process. The Navy SEALs who had rescued her visited Sarah during her hospital stay. Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez brought her a photograph of the building where she had made her stand, showing the extensive damage from the firefight. He explained how her actions had not only saved her own team but had also provided crucial intelligence about insurgent operations in that area of Fallujah. Sarah's parents flew from their home in Texas to be with her during her recovery. Her mother, Maria Martinez, broke down in tears when she first saw her daughter connected to all the medical equipment. Her father, retired Army Sergeant First Class Roberto Martinez, understood the magnitude of what his daughter had accomplished and felt an overwhelming sense of pride, mixed with relief. The psychological impact of the battle was something Sarah would have to address alongside her physical recovery. The memories of the firefight and the intense fear she had experienced were difficult to process. Military psychologists worked with her to help manage the symptoms of post-traumatic stress that naturally accompanied such a traumatic experience. As Sarah's condition stabilized and she began to show signs of improvement, discussions began about military decorations and recognition for her actions. Her commanding officers were unanimous in their recommendation that she receive the highest possible honors for her heroism and selfless service. During the ambush in Fallujah, the miracle of Sarah's survival extended beyond just staying alive. Despite taking 15 bullets and suffering massive trauma, she was making progress that surprised her doctors. Her determination to recover and return to duty became an inspiration to other wounded warriors who were fighting their own battles to overcome combat injuries. 6 months after the ambush in Fallujah, Sarah stood in the East Room of the White House surrounded by her family, fellow Marines, and the Navy SEALs who had saved her life. President Bush was about to award her the Navy Cross, the second highest military decoration for valor, in recognition of her extraordinary heroism during the firefight that could have claimed her life and the lives of her entire team. The ceremony was both a celebration of her survival and a recognition of the incredible courage she had demonstrated in the face of overwhelming odds. As the president read the citation describing her actions, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The months of painful rehabilitation, the countless hours of physical therapy, and the emotional healing required after such trauma had all led to this recognition of her service. Dr. Stevens, who had performed the life-saving surgery, was present at the ceremony as a special guest. She later described Sarah's recovery as nothing short of miraculous, explaining that patients with similar injuries typically face much longer recovery periods and often permanent disabilities. Sarah's determination to return to full duty had driven her to exceed every medical expectation. The citation read at the ceremony detailed how Sarah's actions had not only saved her own team but had also provided crucial tactical advantages to the SEAL team that responded to the ambush. Her decision to single-handedly assault the insurgent position had disrupted their coordinated attack and prevented what intelligence reports later confirmed was planned to be a devastating ambush involving multiple Marine units. Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, now a close friend, stood among the audience with tears in his eyes as he remembered finding Sarah barely conscious, but still gripping her weapon and ready to defend her position. He later told reporters that encountering such dedication and courage had been one of the most inspiring moments of his military career. Following the White House ceremony, Sarah returned to active duty with her unit. Despite offers to accept medical retirement or transfer to less demanding assignments, she chose to remain with her Marine Corps family. Her experience in Fallujah had only strengthened her commitment to serving her country and protecting her fellow service members. The building in Fallujah, where Sarah made her stand, was later secured and investigated by military intelligence teams. They discovered that the insurgents had been planning the ambush for weeks and had intended to use it as a propaganda victory by capturing or killing an entire American convoy. Sarah's disruption of their plan had prevented a major tactical and psychological victory for enemy forces. Sarah began speaking at military training facilities and veteran organizations, sharing her story to inspire other service members and help them understand the importance of never giving up. Even in the most desperate circumstances, her presentations emphasized the critical role that teamwork, training, and mental toughness play in survival situations. The medical supplies that Sarah's convoy had been protecting reached their destination and were used to save the lives of 12 wounded soldiers and civilians. This fact became particularly meaningful to Sarah, as it validated the importance of the mission that had nearly cost her life. Knowing that her sacrifice had directly contributed to saving others gave deeper meaning to her survival and recovery. The bond between Sarah and the SEAL team members who rescued her became a lasting friendship that extended well beyond their military service. They remained in regular contact, supporting each other through various challenges and celebrating each other's achievements in both military and civilian life. As Sarah continued her military career, she carried with her the lessons learned during those desperate minutes in Fallujah. The experience had taught her that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the determination to do what's right despite that fear. Her story became a testament to the incredible resilience of the human spirit and the power of training, teamwork, and unwavering determination. Years later, when asked about that day in Fallujah, Sarah would always emphasize that her survival was not just a personal miracle, but the result of the collective efforts of everyone involved, her team members who provided covering fire, the SEALs who risked their lives to rescue her, and the medical professionals who refused to give up on her recovery. The miracle in Fallujah was, in her view, a reminder that no one survives such ordeals alone, and that the bonds forged in combat create a family that extends far beyond traditional military hierarchy.